Welcome back. On this episode of Proclaim, I'd like to talk about fasting. And this is going to be part of our series on studying, prayer, and fasting. And so if you haven't viewed our videos on studying, I highly recommend that you do so. Spencer did an awesome job.
Proclaim the glory of the Lord.
To begin, I'd like to give a bit of a disclaimer because when it comes to fasting, people have lots of views, they have lots of opinions, and of course we usually think that our view is right, and I get that. But what I hope that you will get from this video is not that this is the only way to fast, but that it might give you some ideas, some insights, some thoughts that you can experiment fasting in your own life, and maybe if you already are fasting, that you could improve upon it even more. It's important to realize that fasting is not just a recommendation, it's actually a commandment. In section 85, verse 21a, the Lord says, I want you to continue in prayer and fasting from this time forth. He desires for us to do this. But even though I'm saying that, I understand completely that fasting is really hard, and it actually can be quite scary. And so this is something that really drives home with me because I have struggled with this. And so I hope to share some of that as we continue on in our video. But there are a lot of benefits to fasting, both spiritual blessings and also physical blessings, which I find to be awesome that our God has given us this commandment to fast, knowing that it actually can bring a lot of benefits, not to just our soul, but to our body. You know, for example, this world it floods us with dopamine, which is a pleasure molecule, something that we receive as an immediate fix. You know, every time you look at your phone and maybe someone's notified you, we get a kick of dopamine. And this dopamine helps to motivate us to do things. But in our world today, it's like everywhere. With television and entertainment, we are flooded with dopamine. And it's important, even scientists will tell us that it's important to go through detox, where we put those things away, put them aside, and learn how to be still. Now, we actually need this to be healthy. Another form of fasting, or another benefit of fasting, is fasting from food. And this is usually what we think about when the term fasting comes up. And even today, with the idea of intermittent fasting and keto, which is based and built around fasting from food for a length of time, we have discovered even in this that there are lots of benefits. It promotes healing in the body, and it does a lot of wonderful things for us. But when we do that, that's different than the fasting that we're talking about today, because again, that is focused mainly just on the physical, and fasting is meant to be spiritual. And so what I hope that you get from this video is the idea of that we're not fasting from something, but we're fasting to God. Now, Paul writes this letter to the Colossians, and in chapter 2, he gives us this really interesting information. You know, he's saying, if you're followers of Christ, why are you following the principles of the world that tell you to not partake of these things? Don't touch, don't eat, don't handle these things that perish when you use them, something like food. And then he leaves us with this in verse 22, which I'd like to read for you. Which things have indeed a show of wisdom in will worship and humility, and neglecting the body as to the flesh, not in any honor to God. Not in any honor to God. That is huge. That just going without something is not what God is after. Instead, he wants us to come to him. Take Jesus, for example. So after he's baptized and he goes into the wilderness, it tells us in Matthew chapter 4 that the Spirit carries him into the wilderness to be with God. He didn't fast from food and water. He fasted to God. Essentially, fasting is God's way of saying, I want you to come up to the mountain and just be with me. In Zechariah chapter 7, verse 5, when God is talking to the people, he's saying, you know, when you fasted and you mourned in the 5th and the 7th month, according to your feasts and your traditions, did you ever do that to me? Was it for me? Or was it for something else? And this is something that really resonates with me because when I was beginning my journey with fasting, what kind of threw me was I don't understand how you can remove something from your life, but you're going to come back to it. You're going to not eat for a time, or maybe you're not going to play video games for a time, or cut out your phone for a certain amount of time, but then you're going to go right back to it. And that just didn't click with me because my thought, my understanding is that I'm always to be seeking the Lord. I'm always to be seeking God. And that's what I discovered, or that's when I discovered that the word fast actually has more than one meaning. The typical meaning, of course, is to abstain from food or water or from anything. But there's another meaning, and it's hold firmly affixed to. And this, to me, is what God is truly after when he calls us to fast. And if you read Isaiah chapter 58, and I recommend that you do, you will discover how God defines fasting and how it might be different than how we typically view it as a people. Ultimately, to me, there are two parts to fasting. There is a spiritual fast, and this I liken kind of to the spirit of prayer. In Paul's letters, he tells us that we are to pray without ceasing. Well, can I really pray without ceasing? There's times when I'm eating, I'm sleeping, I'm doing all these things, and I'm not literally speaking out loud in a formal prayer. But hopefully my life is in the attitude of prayer all day. And the same thing is true of fasting. There is a spirit of fasting where we are holding firmly to God all day. But then just like there are times with prayer that we literally have a formal prayer, there are times with fasting that we literally have a formal fast where we come to the Lord. And because we're coming to him, that means we're going to remove everything else. That could be food, that could be water, that could be whatever. That I'm removing something out of my life for a time so that I can draw even closer to him. But yet in that same view, I'm still trying to hold firmly affixed to him all my days, all my life. So I hope that you found something in this video that was interesting to you, that could pique, or rather that you can take and try to experiment with in your own life of fasting. Because again, I know that it can be very scary, it can be very difficult, but I will tell you that it has made a huge change in my life. And in fact, my wife and I would not be married if it weren't for fasting. And maybe we'll share that testimony at another time. So until next time, this is Andrew King, your fellow brother and companion in this journey we call life.